Hi, this is Donovan. I'm the Family Programs Director at the YMCA of the Rockies, and I'm going to be showing you in this second video how to edit your time lapses so that they turn into a video rather than just a bunch of photos. So I've already imported my photos into Adobe Lightroom. I use two programs for this. I use Adobe Lightroom to edit the photos themselves, and then I use Adobe Premiere to put the photos into a video format. Now, if you have other programs that you already use or like, I'm sure you can also do it in those as well. But if you are already comfortable with Adobe Lightroom or Premiere, they are super helpful and you can do a lot of really cool things. I've already imported my photos. The way that you would do that if you were just coming new to this is you would come over here to the Add Photos button. You would click on that, and then you would pull the photos directly from your camera or from your SD card, whichever works better. Now, for this batch of photos, I've actually selected the photo that I would do editing on. What I noticed when I pulled my photos in is the photos at the very beginning of my time lapse they're pretty dark, so I don't want to really edit those. And the photo at the very end of my time lapse, and I'm going to show you what this looks like, I actually had my settings a little bit off, and I've actually blown this photo out. So let me show you what that looks like. When I pull this open, I'm going to turn on my histogram. So my histogram right here shows me where there are bright spots or darker spots in my photo. If I click on this button here, it's going to show highlight clipping, and you'll see that this photo has quite a lot of highlight clipping in it. Now I'm gonna just live with this, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this photo at the end, and then what I'm gonna do with the time lapse is I'm just gonna send it to white at the end so that you don't really notice quite as well that this photo is really blown out. So the photo that I'm going to edit, though, I'm going to skip back to, I'm going to skip back a few photos and edit a photo that is not quite as blown out, so that I really have something that I can actually work with. Okay, I'm not sure where the one that I edited went, so I'm going to just pick this one here and go into it. Now, I've actually, I'm going to show you the original image, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like after I've edited it. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to reset this photo to the original. So this is what the original photo looked like. You can see this one is also blown out a little bit, but I'm gonna work with it. So the first thing you need to do is you need to crop these. Now this photo is a 3x2 photo. What that means is that the top, or sorry, the horizontal or the vertical side is 2/3 the length of the horizontal side. Now most videos that you see, the vertical side is 9/16 the length of the top. So I'm going to crop it to that aspect ratio. The easiest way to do this is you go to the aspect ratio, you click to 16:9, and then you position it in a manner that you find aesthetically pleasing. So somewhere right in here will work for me. Some of these photos are a lot easier to choose than others when you're doing this. Now, I'm going to turn off this highlight clipping. Now, what I would do from here is I would go through and I would edit this photo to get it looking like I want to. This is going to be totally dependent on what you want to do. For this particular photo, I've already done some edits on one of my other photos in this bunch, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time showing you how to do that. The different tools that you can use to do it, of course, are your light tools over here, which you can adjust the shadows, which I probably would bring the shadows up, turn the blacks down, probably bring the highlights down a little bit. There's a lot of different options for things you can do. Maybe play with the contrast a little bit. Then you can go to your color effects. Now remember, any color effects that you do are going to apply not only to this photo, but they're going to apply to every single other photo in your time lapse. So you do want to be careful with what you choose to do here. For instance, if I were to go to the blues and really saturate those blues or bring the luminance down, which I would definitely not do this. But if I were to do something like this, it'll show up in other parts of my time lapse. The ones that can particularly get you are like the purples. So if you really saturate your purples, some of those photos in the middle are going to have really dark purples, and then some of your later photos are going to look the way that you intended them to. Um, I usually use some effects. Typically, I use the vignette. I find that that helps with the compositional techniques of getting people to focus where you want to and not in your corners. It can help prevent some of the distractions in the corners. I'm going to go back and get rid of this blue because I really don't like this. I also use the gradient tool and the brush tool quite frequently. So the linear gradient, what it is you drag it down and then you're going to apply effects to this section up here, and then there's going to be a transition zone across there. You can also invert it, flip it over. You can like adjust the exposure, which is probably what I would do here. Now this is very similar to a technique that has been used by landscape photographers for a long time. If you've ever heard of the terms dodge and burn, Ansel Adams would do this a lot, where he would adjust the exposure on different parts of his photo in order to make them look the way that he wanted them to. You may also want to increase the saturation of just part of the photo, or you may want to change the clarity or adjust certain parts of the photo. This gradient tool is a wonderful way to do that. The brush tool is also a good way to do that. In this particular photo, in the edits that I made that I'll show you in a little bit, I actually did use the brush tool for this portion up here, and you just brush the part that you want to use it on, and then you can adjust those sections. I used the brush on this section because I wanted to impact the background, but I didn't want to impact these trees over here. Now, I did use the linear gradient for this front portion up here because you can draw a line like this, and you can really impact just that one section of the photo. Both tools, the brush tool and the linear gradient tool, are really helpful and can be really useful. So I'm going to jump back to a photo that has already been edited and show you where I ended up with this photo. Okay, so this is sort of where I ended up. This photo looks like it's got some fairly heavy editing. Now, you do have to remember that this is going to be early in the time lapse. This photo is actually quite dark. If you look at the histogram, you'll see that the majority of this photo lies in this darker section. That's partly just because when the time lapse is going, this is going to go from darker and it's going to become lighter as it goes along. Let's see. My light exposure, I've brought the shadows up, dropped the highlights, dropped the contrast. Now, this photo, I actually made these edits to an earlier photo that's a little bit brighter, and you can see some of those changes a little bit clearer. You can also see this is the part that I brushed. Let me see, I think I actually drew 2 linear gradients. Yeah, I did. I drew a linear gradient there, and I drew one down there, just to help out. Any other changes that I made? I also added a vignette. It impacts this section there. That's what it's gonna change. I'm gonna go back to where it was. Okay, now what the next thing you would do after this is you would take your photo and you're gonna copy those settings over to every other photo in your time lapse. So the way you can do this is you go up here to photo, you click copy edit settings. Now you may want to go and click choose the settings to edit. Some of these, like the crop and the linear gradients, you're going to want to make sure that you copy those over too. If you were doing this on photos that were not from a time lapse, you probably wouldn't want to use these, but because every single photo is taken from the exact same position, that's fine. We can make that happen. So I'm going to click copy. Then I'm going to select all the photos that I need this to apply to. I'm going to go all the way up to there. And then you're going to do paste edit settings. Now it's going to give you a warning about how many photos are going to be affected. You click OK, and then it's going to go ahead and paste those settings to all of your photos. Once that is done, then you're going to go ahead and export your photos. Now the way that you do that is you go here on the file menu and you click export. It'll bring this menu up, and then you're going to select the file type and your dimensions. I am sending mine out as a with a custom dimension. So 3,840 pixels. That is the bottom, the length of the bottom here. 3,480 pixels is a 4K television, so that will actually play pretty nicely on a TV, and it'll be very high quality. I don't usually do output sharpening or change the color space. And when you do this, I also put them all in the same folder. So let me show you the folder that I'm putting them in. Okay, so the way that I organize my photos is I actually have a couple separate folders to put them in. I'm going to jump over here to the one that I'm using. So the way that I do this is I label the time lapse by the date that I took it and then by where I was when I took it. That way it just helps me remember where I was. Now the originals I'm going to save in one folder. I need to actually move all my photos over to this folder. And then the exports from Lightroom I save in a separate folder. Now the reason why I save them in two separate folders is that way I know which are the originals, which are the exports, and they're all together in one folder. It's very easy with this number of photos for them to end up all over your computer, and it's much easier and much cleaner if you can manage to keep them all in the same place. Okay, let's jump over to Premiere and I will show you what I do in there to finish putting this together. Okay, we are now in Adobe Premiere, and I'm going to show you how to open up or create your own project for this particular time lapse. The way you do this is you go to New and you go to New Project. Now, I would recommend saving this in the same folder as that you saved the rest of your time lapse. So you can see here's where I would have my originals and here's where my exports would be. I would recommend saving it in there and then creating a file name that reflects what the name of the time lapse as well. So I've already created one and I've already imported files in here so that I could work out what this was going to look like. So let me show you how I import photos into Adobe Premiere. So you go to your media browser. Now if your media browser is not open, the way that you open this is you go to Window and then you scroll down here until you get to Media Browser and you just check that box. That'll open it up. Now these windows are movable, so you can move them around if you want to. So like let's say for instance I wanted to take my effects and move them down here. I can just drag them down and drop them right here, and now my effects are right here. So my media browser is here. Now the way that you import photos into your project is you're gonna you can select them like this, and then you're gonna just drag and drop them. Now when you do that, when you first do this, it's going to create a new sequence. Now the sequence is going to take on the settings of whatever this photo is. So for us, that's going to set it up automatically for a 4K video. Now if I want to change my sequence settings, I can come up here and I can click Sequence, and then I click Sequence Settings, and then I can actually change anything in here that I want to. So if I wanted to change the frame size, let's say for instance, I could do that there. There's all sorts of different preset editing modes. You can also change the time base. So if you wanted to do 60 frames per second instead of 30, you could do that as well. You can also change the video preview formats. That's going to impact this screen over here, which may be a good idea to do depending on the how much computing power your computer has. I'm not going to make any changes to there for now. Okay, now that we have started importing photos, what I would do is I would go through and import all of the photos that I have in my media folder. Now, sometimes this will happen, and what happened for me is that my photos, I actually passed the 10,000 mark, so the start of my time lapse is actually not at the top of the folder. It's somewhere in the middle, so you do want to watch out for that, otherwise you'll have a weird jump in the middle. Now, the way that you change these photos over is we're going to speed up their time and duration. So you select all the photos, you right-click them, and then you click Speed and Duration. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to take this from being a duration of 4 seconds and 29 frames. I'm going to take it down to being just 1 frame long. You also want to make sure that you've checked the Ripple Edit shifting trailing clips. So what that's going to do is it's going to shorten all of the photos down to only being on the screen for only 1 frame, and it's going to line them all up next to each other. So you'll notice they sort of disappeared. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see them. So there's the 8 photos or so that I imported. This would be less than 1 second of video, those 8 photos. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a nested sequence. So you right click them and you click Nest. Now you can name these nested sequences whatever you want. I don't usually bother naming them. Once I've created a nested sequence, the purpose of doing that is that I can now apply effects and I can apply effect controls to all of the photos without without having to do it to each individual photo. So for instance, my effects over here, I can apply video transitions, so things like film dissolves or dipping to black or to white. You'll notice on my finished time lapse, which is right here, I used a dip to black to fade in. I'll do that a lot of times. Even though the frames start out pretty black, it's a nice transition into the rest of the time lapse. The other things that you can change the effect controls. So I'm going to show you on my longer sequence here, since I've actually made changes to these sequences. The thing that I changed here for this part of the time lapse is I actually changed the scale. So I'm going to jump to the middle of the time lapse so that you can actually see what's happening. I changed the scale. The way that you change these is you will toggle the animation, so you'll turn the animation on. So the way you do that, you click it and it'll give you the ability to create keyframes. Now keyframes are the different points where there is a setting. That's where you sort of make your changes to that, and then it will transition between your keyframes. So for my scale, the scale is how big the photo is. My scale at the beginning is set to 100, and then my scale at the end of this is set to 115. So it's going to scale in 15%. Now I also told it to shift up as it does that, so it's actually going to move up as this timeline zoom, or as this time lapse goes. It's going to zoom in and move up. That's going to sort of keep the top of the frame in the same place all the way through this time lapse, and keep this mountain sort of right in the same place. Now, some other things that I added to this time lapse is I added a audio track, or two audio tracks actually. I added a sound effect. This is a wind sound, and then I also added a audio track underneath that. It's a music soundtrack. Now, the reason I added the wind is because in this time lapse you can actually see the trees moving pretty rapidly, so I felt like it would be a nice way to show that sort of audio part of what was experienced. Now obviously the time base for the audio track is not the same as the video track, so the audio track is actually only like 50 seconds worth of wind blowing. It hasn't been compressed in the way that the video has, but your ears will actually sort of deceive you, and you really won't notice that those, or it won't dawn on you that those don't line up in the finished time lapse. Okay, now that I've created that, I also added some fade-ins. So I have, these are exponential fades on my audio tracks. And then I have done a dip to black at the beginning and a dip to white at the end. I'll often do a dip to black at the end rather than a dip to white. This one was different because if you'll remember, the top of this is sort of blown out, so I decided to shift it into white rather than sending it to black. Now, so once you have finished editing your time lapse, I'm going to show you how to export it so that you can get to a finished product. So the way you do this is you go to File, and then you go to Export and Export Media. You can also just do Control M as your shortcut. So the format that we export this in is going to be in H.264. That's going to give us an MP4 format. It's very useful to use if you're going to put it on YouTube or on Facebook or share on Instagram. It works really well for any of those. I will typically use a preset. So the presets, there's a bunch of them here. You can just do a high quality 4K. That will give you basically something that will work in almost any situation. Now you'll notice this does give us a very large file size, so you can play around with the settings if you need a smaller file size, if this does not work for you. I also will change the output name, and the way that I will change it is I will label them based on the date and then where I took it. I save this generally in the same folder as with the rest of my exported JPEGs and my original JPEGs, just so that I have everything in one place. Now, when you go to export it, you can either choose the export button or you can choose the Q button. I will often use the Q button because that will open up the Adobe Media Encoder. I use the Adobe Media Encoder because that way I can close Adobe Premiere or work on a different project in Adobe in Premiere while this video is exporting. So I'm going to go ahead and close this because I've already exported it and finished this up. So that's basically how you create a time lapse in from the very beginning of going outside and taking it, all the way through to the editing part of creating this time lapse. Now, I would love to see what you're able to create, so please go ahead and create some time lapses. Use whatever software you need to be able to create your video, and then please post them on social media. So if you post them on Instagram, use the hashtag YMCA Rockies. I'd love to see what you can create. If you have any questions, please comment at the bottom of this video or at the bottom of the previous video, and I will do my best to answer any questions that you have about how to create time lapses. So thanks very much for watching this video, and have a great rest of your day.